Pod in My Noggin, hosted by CK Sims, creating a platform to elevate, educate, and heal by creating a space where people can share their stories of struggle, triumph, and redemption. CKS Media.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Pod in My Noggin. And I'm your host, CK Sims. And this week, we are joined by author and philanthropist, Julie Barth. Welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. I
How are you?
appreciate it. I'm well.
Oh,
How are you?
my pleasure. I am doing well, doing well.
Good.
So, Julie, you filled out the form as everyone does, and you have a pretty interesting story to share with us today, but also some pretty interesting results from said story, right?
Yes, I definitely have a unique story.
You have a unique story. So let's talk about younger Julie. What was younger Julie?
It's hard. It's funny, I guess the older you get, the more the older version of yourself clouds the younger. So I like to believe I'm the same person, maybe a little wiser, but I have always been a very empathetic person. I'm a caretaker by nature. I'm a mother of 6, so that kind of makes sense. Although it's funny, I never thought I would have kids. So says the woman with 6 kids. I guess I was just always, I see myself as very quiet and an introvert, although everyone else seems to think I'm an extrovert. And I never really I kind of always wanted to fade into the background. I was never, when people would sing happy birthday to me, I would hide under the table. I've never liked standing out, which ironically has defined my entire adult, life, as standing out, not, being the normal family, not having the normal family. So I guess the older me has come to terms with the fact that, normal is all in degrees, and it's all what you make of what you have. So I guess I stopped longing for the things that I thought were so important and started looking more at the things that I had. And what's that saying about, it's about wanting the things you have, not, having the things you want, or whatever, whatever the backside of that is. So.
I like that part though. When you were talking about, I'm sorry, I have a puppy that's here playing, if you can hear it. So, and she's getting better with, my podcast and meetings with not needing so much attention, but she's still, I like the part where you were talking about, always feeling like you wanted to shift into the background. And the reason it's not that I like it. What I mean is that I feel like that is very much who I am and have always been as well. And like the similarities there between the two of us is most people would never know that I like to be quiet. I don't like attention, things like that, because for some reason, the persona that they see is this like outgoing, lively human being. And I'm so contented being at home in my house, just reading a book and being with my dog, right? Like I don't need all of that attention. I want to go back to that question that I asked. One of the things I've been thinking a lot lately on when I'm interviewing people and when I'm thinking of my life. When you were a child, what did you envision or dream of for your future?
Again, so, I grew up in a very small household. It was just my father and my mother and my sister. And my mother, if I want to say I'm an introvert, she's the queen introvert. So, we didn't go on vacation a lot. We weren't really a part of the community. My sister and I maybe were, but my mother was always at home. She didn't want to drive anywhere. She didn't. So I guess I grew up kind of lonely in that respect and isolated. So I always wanted a big family. That was my thing. I don't know. I love the chaos of it. I love it because I don't like the word clanny, but I think, I like being surrounded by people I love and I trust. And, that's always been very alluring for me. And as far as having children, I always assumed, well, if you didn't like one, there's 5 more to choose from. Because when my sister and I didn't get along, it was just the 2 of us. So I always just kind of envisioned being a stay-at-home mom, which, gosh forbid for Generation X that that would be a thing. And I think when people would ask me, well, what do you want to be when you grow up? I hid the fact that I never wanted to be more than happy and content and settled, So, yeah, I think, like I said, when you have a plan for yourself, the universe decides otherwise. And so, what I've always been seeking, I have, but the parts about it that I thought would make me happy, I guess I never really got, the quiet, the serene, part of just having a, family unit that wasn't always bombarded with outside stuff. But again, I think that what you think you want and what you get are two different things. And I think the key to life, which I still figuring out, is to, to reconcile with the, what you have versus what you wanted. Because sometimes I think the things that we want, we really don't. And that's why when we get them, whether that's a car or a nice house or, they don't make you happy because you think you want those things, but you find that they're very empty when you do have them. And sometimes the things that you, like I said, things that you don't want that come into your life make the biggest impression on it and change your world in ways that you could never understand or other people don't understand. So
That's very profound and very true, right? We're always chasing something,
yeah,
we're dialed into something. I'm still chasing being a millionaire, but I have been smart enough to realize with age at 44 that just if I become a millionaire, sure, life will change to a degree, but I'm not going to find happiness in money. I have to
right.
find happiness in me. Like
Yeah.
it's not external, right?
No, you're not
And
going to
like
get it from somewhere else. Yeah.
no, and I'm not going to get it from, a new fabric printing machine because I love to do like, you know, crafty things and make quilts and whatever. I'm not going to get it from that, but the chase is there that it's in your mind. And so, yes.
Yeah.
So you grew up, small family, you moved out, now you have to tell me what this is. You had mentioned that you fell in love with and married your grammar school first crush?
Yeah. Yeah. I moved from one small town to another small town. When I say small, it was Chicago, so nothing's really small. Um, but I remember the very first person I met was the man that I eventually ended up marrying. So, I always tell my kids, be really nice to those kids in grammar school because you might end up marrying them. Um, but he was my first kiss, and then we kind of parted ways. We went to middle school, and I was awkward in middle school, and we went to high school, and again, I am very introverted, and he was, the quarterback of the football team on varsity, and he always just seemed a little bit out of my reach. But there was still that part of him that I remembered from the playground. So we met back up again after college in a bar, and it was like I had found that piece of me that was missing that I hadn't even known. And my entire adult life really was defined by growing up with him and knowing him, and just having that connection with somebody for as far back as you can remember. So
That is incredible. And I love that. I love that, right? It seemed very
yeah.
fairy tale and that sort of thing. Um, so you got married and you had children, which
Yes, well, not in that order. My parents got divorced,
okay,
so I
no, that's
decided I
fine.
was, yeah, well, I decided I was never getting married. My parents did not have a good marriage, and I was like, we don't need to be married. Well, we ended up having my son, and, I think when he was about 2, I thought, this is silly. We are not rock stars. So we ended up getting married when he was 2. And so we had my son. And then again, I had this desire for a big family, and we started right away. Where my son was, kind of a surprise. The second pregnancy was very hard to come by. I lost 2 pregnancies before I had my second child, who's my daughter Tatum, and she, from the get-go, it was just one thing after another. She wasn't supposed to be born. They told me she would come out and not be able to breathe, she wouldn't grow, and this was pre-Google, so. Again, I always say that's probably a blessing, not a curse, but they had no idea what was going on. They would say to me, they would just throw things at me and see what stuck, like they said she had trisomy 18, then I have an amniocentesis and she doesn't. But So that was a lot. It was 9 months of, is she going to be able to be okay? And we had the ultrasounds and she looked fine. She was just so small. So she ended up coming out and she, which we didn't know at the time, after 3 years, a lot of her issues were really about medical malpractice when she came out. They were not prepared for her. They damaged her throat severely. So a lot of what we were dealing with when she was a baby and, and all the trauma from her birth were not related to her global what's wrong here, but unfortunately, the medical community was so focused on what is wrong with Tatum. That was her name. What's wrong with Tatum? Not what, how can we treat Tatum's symptoms? It was more like they had to find a cause for all of these things that were going on. And when push came to shove, I found out when she was 4 that she had something called primordial dwarfism, which, she's got the kind of dwarfism that just she's proportionately very, very small. But really, in the scheme of everything that we went through, traveling from hospital to hospital over and over again, seeing specialists, the Mayo Clinic, the crux of what really went wrong with her really didn't have much to do with her genetic makeup or whatever. We still don't even know what causes primordial dwarfism. um, so that was a long road, but finally we had surgery and she was doing better. So we decided, because true to me, it's too quiet. Let's shake things up. So we had 2 more children, and so right as we were getting back to life, and we had lost a lot of friends through Tatum because we couldn't find nursing care. Being a special needs parent is very taxing, especially when I was 30, so all of my friends were in the corporate world and they were doing their thing. And I was really kind of at home taking care of and hoping she was going to live for 3 years. So it was nice to rejoin community. And, Colin became the coach at a football team. We were just a big part of the community. And he was a trader down at the Board of Trade, and he wasn't acting like himself. I knew he was stressed out at work. I knew things were going poorly. But there was never a time when we couldn't like communicate, and he just seemed very locked off. And he was back and forth to the doctor with stomach problems. And finally I said to him, can you please just go to the hospital, figure out what's going on? Let's get this fixed. I don't know what it is, but I need you back. And little did I know, within 4 hours, I showed up at the hospital and he was diagnosed with stage 4 pancreatic cancer. And they said he had 2 weeks to live and take him home and let him say goodbye to his kids. So, it was a rejoining of life back to crashing. So,
Wow. Sorry, I'm processing. Right? Like I'm so
yeah,
like you had said something just popping back real quick. You had said you lost friends because you had a special needs child. Like being a
yeah,
parent is hard. We all know this because they require so much attention. But I don't know if people really understand how taxing being a parent to a special needs child is. Because it's not just that they have special needs, and it's all of the things that you had to go through the malpractice type situation where they were just trying to figure out what was wrong, but whatever. There's also a stigma attached to being a special needs parent and that child. And
yeah,
it's, as you said, very isolating. You're isolated anyway because you have so much responsibility, but then there's a lack of understanding or desire to understand from the community as a whole when you have it. And
yeah.
I'm not
Well,
speaking
yeah,
from
yeah. Special
experience.
needs people, yeah, I think they make special needs children make people feel uncomfortable. And that is the one thing that I've learned throughout life. It's people do not mean to pull away. I truly believe that. But I think it's a natural tendency for people to go, I don't want to say the wrong thing. I don't know how to help. She seems angry all the time. She's stressed out. I'm just going to take a step back. And then, when they take a step back, then you feel like they're abandoning you. So you pull back,
Yeah.
and it leads to and then there are other special needs parents, but you don't really want to talk to them either, because misery really doesn't love company all the time. You do sometimes, but you kind of like when you're out with people, like the last thing you want to do is carry all your baggage with you if you're able to even get out. So I appreciate you saying that. It is, I had many people who were like, why would you have 2 more children? Because I had Tatum and then we had 2 more. And I think the people around me, their impression was why would you do that? Why you have so much to focus on now? And looked
Because
at me as if I was being kind of irresponsible, I think.
exactly, and then because they're also imposing their own insecurity on you because there's the inherent risk, right? That if
Right.
you've had one who is special needs, that you could have another and another that's special needs, and so but they don't
Correct.
see what I feel like. What and I love how kind you are with what you said about people. It's just a natural thing, and I don't think they do it to be malicious. And you're being very kind, and I love that. I'm not always so kind in my thought process. What I see though is that it's just when there's a special needs child involved, people just see the work or the disappointment or the barriers. They do not
And the
see,
pity,
however,
they pity you.
yes,
Hmm.
they do not see, however, the love that you have for that child and the love that that child has for you, and how together it's a partnership that you will go through in life, and it's a bond,
Yeah.
and they just tend to focus on the discomfort as opposed to some of them.
And the burden,
Yeah,
I know that other people, and I'm not going to sugarcoat it. It is a burden. But burdens come with blessings. So yeah, any child is a burden. And I'm not going to say that you don't have to grieve the loss of normalcy for your child. Of course you never want your child to, be in a hospital or not be able to, live on their own or whatever, we don't, especially as parents, don't have their head in the sand. We're not pretending everything is fine. We're not saying my kid's totally normal. We're not saying it's not hard to watch. I get
of
it.
course.
I see other people's special needs children, and as a special needs parent, there are times when I look at other children and I think, gosh, that poor parent. And I catch myself because I do it as a special needs parent to other special needs parents. So I guess that's why I'm giving people grace, because I don't think people intentionally think, they don't go, oh, I'm running from that. I think that it just is that level of uncomfortability where it's easier to just rationalize it and say, oh, well, I don't want to make her uncomfortable, whatever it is. So, yeah, I guess maybe if you had asked me 20 years ago how I felt about being a special needs parent, I might not have been as kind about it. But again, that's, I think, what age does to you. You recognize that people do what they're capable of. And to think that everyone's out there trying to abandon you, leave you, that would be that would for me be a very hard pill to swallow. And it would really change the way that I see the world. And I don't, I like the way I see the world. So.
I love that, and I don't want to argue that point either. I think that the thing for me is I do give grace. I believe grace should always be given. But I always also start to think now as I'm getting older. I'm 44. I assume you're in the same bracket as I
Sure.
am. I'm not asking your age. I'm not polite, but um, I I just feel like yes, okay, human nature is discomfort and to sort of shrink away and that sort of thing. But like we need to do better.
Yeah.
So I will say to my audience and anybody who actually sees that, if you see a mom or a dad or both who have a special needs kid, they look like they're struggling or they're going through a rough time, just reach out.
Yeah.
If you offend them by offering your assistance, that's on them then. It's not
Sure.
you. But you can
I
you
say
can
that all the
say,
time. Yeah.
yeah,
And don't ask what can I do to help. I'm gonna lay that to rest right now. Don't say what can I do to help. Look around. You can see what you can do to help. Because if you
yeah,
say to
just
someone, what can I do to help? They're going to say, I don't know. Or they're going to say, no, I'm fine. Just step in and do it. That to me, that's kind of a cop out when people say, well, hey, if you need anything, who's ever called you, who's ever followed up when you say, hey, if you need anything? I've never had
no
anybody take
one.
me up on that. No,
No one.
ever.
Yeah. And I
Never.
do
Yeah.
that often and I truly mean it when I say
Right.
it. Like, if they were to call me right now and say, I need this done, I'm going to finish up
Yeah.
what I'm doing right now. I'll get over there right away. When I offer it to someone, I mean it, but they never ever call. Let's go ahead because we could probably have 5 hours of conversation. I feel with you about stuff, but so you sent your husband off to the hospital. 4 hours later, you went there. He had stage 4 pancreatic cancer. They
Yes.
told you to take him home, say goodbye to his family. How long was it?
Um, he lived 16 months. His mother had ovarian cancer, and she ended up having an additional 30 years on her life, where they gave her 10% to even make it through the initial surgery. She, at one point, was the oldest surviving ovarian cancer patient in the United States. Knowing that it was genetic at that point, we had all the hopes in the world that he was going to beat it, and we got him into a trial. By we, I mean me, because he was too sick, and he was doing fabulous. He was like their star patient. And for anyone who's never been involved in the chemo world, you go in for chemo, you have a little chair, that's it, maybe a chair in front of you. Well, we were rock stars. He was beating it to the point where we thought he was going to be able to go for surgery. They were welcoming us in, giving us our own room. It was really like rock star treatment. But he ended up missing an entire cycle because he wanted to go with my oldest son to baseball. And, I was not going to argue with him. He knew what he wanted. And, I don't know. It probably would have happened anyway. But when he came back, it had spread and he got kicked out of the trial. And from that point, it really was just a downward spiral.
They kicked him out of the trial because
If you are in a drug trial, the way that he was, if the cancer spreads to another organ or another area, then you are dismissed from your seat in the study because they don't want your numbers, pretty much. Sorry to say, but it's true.
well,
So, yeah.
I figured
So
there was probably some
yeah,
asinine
he was
reason.
promptly showed the door, and not in a very kind way. He called me when he was at chemo, and he said, "Jules, they're not letting me go to chemo today." And I said, "Well, why?" And he said, because they found out that it's traveled." And I was stunned, but unfortunately, that's the world of experimental trials. So it is what it is. He was granted 16 months, and some of them were very good, and some of them were not. So it did, allow us to be with him for longer than we would have.
Well, shame on the trial because they treated you like rock stars, and
Yeah,
then
we were
couldn't
not
they
rock
have?
stars. Yeah, and
What my mind, because it's very analytical. I always go to like the big picture here. I'm like, could they the numbers if it had spread and he was already doing so well beating it in the trial, if they had continued with him, could it have shown that it was more applicable to different types? I don't know. But like that's how my brain
probably.
works.
Hmm.
So
Yeah, I
shame
mean, I
on
would think so,
whoever
but
that was.
they're not going to take that chance because if they do that for him, then they have to do it for the next person, whether they missed a cycle or not. So was it that he missed time? I don't know. Um, I'd like to believe that it would have happened anyway, because then I know that he made the right decision, and I know he made the right decision because those are memories that my son, will cherish forever. So,
Wow. Wow. We are going to take a quick break and we will be right back.
Partner today with CK Sims and Pod and My Noggin to get in front of an audience that cares. You will be supporting mental health stories, tales of resilience, and uplifting content, aligning your brand with bringing goodness, authenticity, and kindness front and center. This spot could be yours. Do you have a story of struggle and resilience? One that you want to share with others and possibly help someone through their own struggles? Find the link in the show description and fill out the guest form today.
Welcome back, everybody. Before the break, we have been talking to Julie Barth about early years and her adult life, marrying her grammar school sweetheart, first kiss, um, and what it was like to have a child born with primordial dwarfism, and then to later, after 4 kids, right?
yes, my
You,
youngest was 6 months, and the oldest was 10 when he was diagnosed. So, yeah, it was, and Tatum, the one with special needs sandwiched in between. So it was a very tumultuous time.
yes. And I mean, you're still standing. I think
I'm
that's
actually sitting down.
yeah, no, but
Yes,
I'm
I am
like,
still standing.
oh, yeah, so like I just find it the human spirit is so incredible that way to have faced that sort of experience and then to still be here smiling on a podcast however many years later, right? So he passed away. You had 4 children. You were a single mom at that point.
Yes,
You met another person.
yes. He worked in my home. When Colin passed away, we had bought a really old house and redid every part of it. Yeah, it was our dream house. And after he passed, I really, I wanted to leave. Um, just, it was like I brought out sadness in everyone. Just seeing me, people would break down and cry because everyone was so invested in our story. Everyone knew us, 4 kids. They had fundraisers for us, and where I had spent 16 months of grieving and losing him, everyone else's grief started the day he passed. And I was kind of like, I can't sit in this anymore. I watched my best friend die every day for 16 months. I got to move on. So there was a gentleman who, like I said, I wanted to change the house just so I can stay there, working in my home. And he was much younger than me, and he was very unencumbered. He didn't have any responsibilities. He was very opposite from me. He was loud. Um he didn't care about what people thought of him. He would say whatever he felt, and to me, who had felt so sandwiched or like locked down for really my entire adult life. And I had a very my mother, I love her dearly, but she's very opinionated, and so having somebody who was so free and saying whatever they felt, and it was, to me, so liberating. I was like, you mean you can just walk around and say anything you want, and you don't care what people think? Like, that is amazing. And at that point in my life, that's what I needed. Whether it was good for me or not, it was what I felt like I couldn't breathe, and he almost made me feel like I could breathe again. And after about a year, I started dating him, so it wasn't immediately. And within, I think a year from that, we ended up having another child and moving away from home, very far away from home. I left my family, the whole community, pretty much didn't even say it more than see ya. And I just picked up and left and thought, well, I just don't want to be me anymore. And if I change my name and I change where I live and I pack it all away, then it won't exist anymore. So, unfortunately, it doesn't happen that way. Spoiler alert. But that was my thinking, is I don't want to be Julie Barth anymore. And I went to great lengths to make sure nobody knew me. Nobody knew where I went. I just was living in a fishbowl, and I didn't want to anymore.
How long did that last?
Well, we moved across state to literally a house up in the mountains. When we got there, Tatum, who at that point was 13, ended up coming down with a rare form of soft tissue cancer, which was completely unrelated to anything that she was born with. And she had another 8 surgeries where they removed her right side torso and grafted her legs. And it was really at that point, we were probably married about 2 years at that point, when I recognized that all of what I thought was so liberating and what I thought he was doing, he never asked how I was. He never wanted me to open up, and everybody else was trying to get me like to slow down and process and grief. And he didn't want that. And I thought, oh, he's doing it for my benefit. He knows that I need space. He knows I need room. Well, 2 years into the marriage, another baby. Um, Cancer with Tatum, and I recognized in that 2 years that he didn't care. It wasn't an act. He wasn't giving me space. He just literally didn't care. So we actually stayed together for 10 years. I had two more children with him, really raised them by myself. He was always off doing something. And I divorced him about 2 years ago. But it was a decade of some really hard times, a lot of emotional abuse, a lot of he's very mean to my children. It was a hard time.
Your children and his and your children?
More my children. I can honestly say that he really didn't have any contact with his own children. They were nuisances to him. He was never around. I'm not even sure that he wasn't there for birthdays, and it made a spectacle out of every holiday, just being nasty. So, if he treated them a little bit better, maybe it's because they were babies and they didn't have voices to talk back. But he was very brutal to specifically one of my children who he just didn't get along with. And it was a very tense time where I was trying to keep everyone separate and trying to make nice and trying to make everybody happy and trying to convince my children that their experience was not real, that he wasn't that bad, that, he was just trying to A, B, or C, and, making excuses for him, not only to my children, my family, everyone. And it was exhausting and wrong because he was exactly who he was acting he was.
That's hard.
Yeah,
That's
it was
hard.
hard.
You know what I mean? Like, it's such a, I'm always cognizant of when people tell me stories like this, what questions come in my mind, right? And as a human being, the question comes, why did you stay? But that's not a fair question to ask anybody who's in an abusive.
I think it's a fair question, and I'm going to stop you because um, I think that you don't know why you stay, but when you're in that situation, you get out of it. It kind of all makes sense and it unravels, and you figure out why you did the things you did. And I will say that I stayed really because I had attachment issues. I was not going to lose another marriage. I was not going to lose another husband. And he knew that. So he would do things to control me and keep me in my place and threaten to leave. And the minute he would threaten to leave, I would just fall apart. I just could not lose somebody else in my life. And then I think when it came to the point where I knew it was as toxic as it was, our children were so little. And the things that I found out about him, the things that he was doing, the things that I found out he was capable of, when they were very little, he traveled a lot, so he was never home. And I didn't know why I stayed as long as I did. But when I got on the other side of it, and, when we did get divorced, he came for me hard. I mean, he, said things about me that I was an alcoholic, that I was a drug addict, that I was this, and had saved text messages and was sending them to his friends and had taped me. And just really set me up in ways that I couldn't see coming. And I think the reason I stayed as long as I did is because I knew that he would come for the kids. I think I knew he would use them, and they were too small, and it felt like I had to protect them. And if I pulled the plug at that point, um, I knew that they would be vulnerable. And again, I didn't do it consciously. I can honestly say I begged him to stay. It was not like I walked. I only walked after my son, the one who I was talking about before, confronted me and, made me look really hard in the mirror, said, I haven't had a childhood. I have, slept with one eye open my entire life. I'm afraid of him. He's threatened to kill you. He's threatened to kill me. And you just keep welcoming back. And so, I think people stay in these situations because it's too overwhelming to think about leaving, because you feel like you're going to lose it all. I'd lost my family. I'd been isolated, and I was afraid to lose my kids. And so you stay and you just try and make it less horrible than it really is because you're afraid of it getting worse.
And so I want to pop back to that question, what I said about it's not a fair question.
Sorry.
The reason I want to reiterate that is because I love what you just said, right? I love that you own up to it, and you now recognize all of the reasons why you stayed. I hate to question why did you stay, because I think it's unfair. We're looking at a surface issue problem, right? Abusive husband, you stayed 10 years. We're not going deeper to understand the psychological components of why a person stays in an abusive relationship. And there always is. And just as
Yes.
you clearly articulated what those reasons were for in your own, as you had described, your own selfish reasons, right? In the moment, but then
Hmm.
also subconsciously knowing that your children would be vulnerable and that he could potentially come for you, that sort of thing. All of those reasons, they add up. And to uproot a life, it's the devil you know sometimes, especially in these types of relationships when women stay for longer than they have to. If you, because you're there, you recognize patterns, you kind of know, okay, if I do this, I can get them to calm down enough to keep the kids safe, or to keep myself safe, or if I just hold out for another, few days, he's going to be back on the road. Like, these are bargains that you will make with yourself to make peace. But the unknown of you uprooting that group of I think you had 6 kids now, right? 7, 6?
Yes, 6.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Uproot the whole family and do what?
Yeah.
Like, that is a massive equation to try and figure out when
Yeah,
you are
especially when
living in
you're a stay-at-home mom, you know.
it. Like, it's just,
I was lucky enough to it, I had some money on reserves, and he never supported us at all. He never gave anything to the marriage. But I'm, one of those very unfortunate people that he was coming for my money. You know, I hadn't been in the workforce, so I did build a career of being a writer. But yeah, I mean, the overwhelming, what am I going to do? He's going to come from my house. He's going to come from my kids. And as you so nicely said, there are so many layers of all of this. And from the outside, if somebody had come to me 20 years ago and said, all right, would you ever? Of course, you say, I would never. Oh, I would never. And even when you're in it, you're gaslighting yourself and saying, oh, it's not that bad. If I just keep my mouth shut, I don't want to upset the apple cart. Things are calm right now, because they do it in such a way that they box you into this constant state of fear. I mean, you literally feel like you're going to die if you don't keep everything together. I mean, it's a real feeling like you're going to die. And I don't think you can understand until you have been abused in that way to such a degree that your brain no longer makes rational sense. I mean, nothing makes sense to you anymore.
well, I also, just for people at home, and I'm so mindful of time because I really want to talk about other things with you, but
Sure.
um, just as children, when a child is young and they're in an abusive um, household, rarely do they look at their parents or guardians as being the monster, because the monster is the one that clothes them, feeds them, and protects them from the outside elements. So what happens is they actually go inside and convince themselves that they are the monster. And this is
Mhm.
why we have so many people in adult life who are feeling dysfunctional and having trauma and all of this stuff, because it's very unresolved. In relationships where you have this imbalance, where you have these abusers, it doesn't start out that way, right? Like, they always show you the pretty side of the card, and you get to see the good stuff, and they rope you in. And one of the greatest and also worst character traits as humans is hope,
Yeah.
because hope can be so severely exploited if you know what you're doing. And they do. Somehow it's just natural to them. They exploit your hope. And before you know it, it doesn't happen like one day. Like,
Mm.
Julie didn't wake up one day and then all of a sudden he's an asshole. No, this was a progressive thing. And then the next thing you know, you're trapped. And that is
Yeah.
how these relationships work. And that is why I feel that question is so unfair. Because
Yeah.
if I'm so happy that you had the time to reflect and be able to answer that question. There are still women out who have been out of those relationships for so long who still don't understand the full how or why.
Well, there's a lot of shame. I mean, I'm not gonna
Oh,
every time I go on one of these podcasts, sometimes I listen to my own story and go, what were you thinking? Because if you expose someone else's bad behavior, you have to expose your own. Relationships do not happen in a bubble. It can be very imbalanced, but it is never just one person because the other person stays. You're complacent just for being there in your own head. So yeah, it is that I think that's another reason why people stay, because they don't want people to know what's been going on in their home, what they've done, the things that, they're not proud. Nobody's proud to stay in a relationship like that, to watch your children be abused, to, let someone walk all over you. So It is, I think, hope and shame.
Yeah.
I think probably one of the biggest guiding lights for me was shame, because I thought if people had any idea the way that I behaved, like, um, I would be crying one minute and, kicking him out. And the next I'd be begging him back. And I didn't know what I was doing. This was something I didn't understand. But, I was coming out of the relationship with Colin, and I thought, well, maybe I am broken. Maybe that experience, going from Tatum to maybe I am mentally ill. Maybe I am broken. And, he was just happy to pick that baton up and run with it. So, these people also, it's not only that they don't show themselves, they're very good at picking people who are insecure, who are empathetic, who are pleasers, because they know that they will put in the relationship, that person will put their partner above themselves. They can sense it, they know it, and they choose people. So, I always say to people when when my foundation's dealing with someone, I always say, the best thing I can say is that you must be a really good person, because narcissists, they don't pick demanding people. They don't pick selfish people. They don't, because a selfish person wouldn't even give them the time of day, because they're, I think it's the people that tend to be caregivers, put other people above them, that find themselves in these situations.
I am moved, I have to tell you, by how you stand in your story, and the way you articulate your story. I'm very moved by it. I'm inspired by it. I'm inspired by the fact that you're just so succinct with like your own recollections. Um, I would like to tell the world to kick the shame. Just kick the
Me
shame.
too.
Because it's not like you woke up one day and you said, I'm going to get myself in the most shittiest situation I could possibly imagine. I'm going to spend 10 years there. It's not how it works. I get that you're shameful. I get there's a lot of people who end up in these situations who have heard about them and said that would never happen to me,
Oh,
right?
no, yeah.
Because they feel so convicted and they would never let that happen. But it does happen because these people are so good at breaking down your defenses, getting you vulnerable, even when you might be a little bit selfish, making you feel guilty for that selfishness. Like
Yeah.
they can exploit all of those things. And can I ask this question? Is that chapter now closed?
It is. It is. It took me 3 years um, to gain full custody. He no longer can see any of my children. And I would never have wanted that step to be taken. My my four children lost their dad, so I would have really done anything to keep a healthy relationship with him and his children. But he was never out to be a dad. He was out to show everyone he was a dad, but never stepping into that place. And he did some really dangerous things. And so, luckily, yes, we have not seen him in many years. But every time I go out and I put myself out there, of course, there's always that concern, because that kind of fear never leaves you.
Of
So
course not.
I do step, just that he'll come back, or it just never leaves you. The fear of having someone who's abusive in your life and threatens you continually. It doesn't just, so is it resolved? Yes, I am stronger. I found my voice. I do this specifically because I don't want other people to feel shame. I wrote my first book, which is about Colin and Tatum and the resilience, and in the goodness of caregiving, and the life lessons. I'm My second book that's coming out, I wrote because I want people to identify with me, because I know there are so many women out there that will stay in these marriages, literally. There's that song by Halsey about following somebody to the graveyard, and you will, and you don't see it, and you're so afraid that you stop making rational choices. And so that's why I speak to this, because there are people that don't get out. There are people that don't make it safely out. And I'm not going to say that he was physical, but it only takes once. Gabby Petito is a perfect example about what can happen when you downplay emotional abuse. And it frustrates me that the courts don't even acknowledge emotional abuse. It's not even a type of abuse. So that's why I do what I do.
And yes, that could be another 45-minute segment about emotional
Sorry.
abuse and the justice
Yes,
system.
yes.
This is I'm like, well, maybe we have to book another session to
I
talk
am
about more.
all yours.
Um,
We could talk about it
but
all
yes,
day long.
I want to talk about your writing. So you have, there's 3 books in total, right? And I remember the
Yes.
first one is called Notes from a
Notes
Blackberry.
from a Blackberry. Hmm.
Um, is that the one that's about Tatum and Colin?
It is. So I wrote it while I would take Colin to chemo. I had a Blackberry, literally, and I started writing I was unpacking Tatum, so I started writing Tatum's story because her story is crazy, the ups and the downs. I would take her in for a shot, and she would be flatlining. So I was unpacking all of that, and it was perfect time because everything was quiet. And then it just kind of naturally flowed into real time with Colin, and it sat on my laptop for 10 years. I didn't write it for the universe. I wrote it because I really, well, first of all, I was just trying to process everything, and secondly, I knew my children would probably never meet him or get to know him, and I wanted to make sure, you have all these stories that you just think genetically pass on to your kids, but they don't. So I really felt this need to document all that we had been through and how much he wanted to stay here and what a great dad he was. So that's where Notes from Blackberry comes from.
And then you have From Blackberries to Thorns.
And that's about my second marriage and getting into it, getting out of it.
Okay, so I just want to make sure that we're clear. So the first one's already out,
Yes.
okay, and is available online and all major bookstores.
Yes, and it's also on Audible. So a childhood friend of mine is a voice actress, so she did the audio version of it. So
I wish I could get into Audible, but I'm such a hold it in my hands person that I always said I would never be old fashioned like my parents, but I am very old fashioned.
well, some things are worth holding on to.
Yes, absolutely. And the second book is coming out or it's out
It will be out this fall. Yes,
this fall. All right, so we are already in the fall, everybody.
I
So
know,
it's
I
gonna
know,
be
I
out
know. I'm
soon.
working on it.
Um, and do you from an artistic perspective, would you say like the style of the writing from the first book to the second book evolved? Where you're talking about in the first book something very um, precious and sentimental versus now like sort of like a battle that you had to go through and then win. Like
Yeah, I think that you could probably run I'm a psychology major. I think you could run an entire psychology class on the two different books. And it's interesting to me because I did try and write them separately so that you could pick one up and not know the first is there. You could write the first one and not know the second one. And although I'm the same person, I'm the same character, but I would love to have a focus group to say how people perceive me, and in the first book, I can imagine that I'm going to be, what everyone thought I was at the time, this heroine who has been a caregiver, then you read the second one and it's like, what happened to this woman who was trying so hard to, save everyone and keeping everything together to this woman who's falling apart and letting this man, walk all over her and her children. And I hope that the progression of me will, inspire people like me who don't recognize themselves anymore to remember who they were when they started, because it is very easy to forget who you are. And if I had not written that first book, and that's why I read it, I didn't have the courage to read it until after I got divorced, and I read it and I got to the end of it, and it's right when Colin passes away. And I thought, my crazy didn't even start yet, as crazy as that sounds. Um, so yeah, it's like I said, I would love to run a focus group and say, have somebody read the second one first and say, well, what do you think of this woman? And then have another group and say, well, and then say, all right, now you can read the first and you can read the second. Because hopefully it will, bring
I
to
would love to
light.
do that.
Yeah. I think it would be interesting to,
And what's so
well, what
interesting,
do you think of her?
it would be and one of the things to me that comes to mind is that, in the first book, you're going to be champion. And in the second book, that that's going to shift into survivor. So
Survivor,
they look
stupidity,
very,
it depends on who you read it.
I guess, but I mean, to
Yeah, I
me,
mean,
I have a background in psychology and I am a feminist and I have worked with crisis, women in crisis before. So I have a very different and very broad sort of like understanding of what that looks like for people and firsthand stories. So I will always like pick up my axe and fight anybody when
yeah,
when they
I'm
come for
glad
these
you
women.
do. Yes, I'm glad
Yeah,
you do
because
because someone needs to. Yeah,
yeah. So but now so you've the second book's coming out this fall, but there is a third book
there is.
called From Thorns to Blossoms. I like the passage that you know what I mean, from notes from a
Yeah, thank you.
blackberry, blackberry to thorns, thorns to blossoms. So this book is scheduled to come out.
Probably not until spring of next year. They're both written. It's just timing. The third one is in editing right now, but the first two are my memoirs. They're the true story of me and who I am and how I got to where I am. And the third book is kind of an unpacking of all of it, hopefully trying to like give some practical tips and really, delving into what we're speaking of here. My real goal in all of this is to help people that are stuck in their situation and can't find a way out, to have the courage to know that there's always a way. And I had somebody who watched one of my podcasts get very upset in the comments and say, well, you don't understand, sometimes you can't get out. And I can appreciate that. I can. But where there is a will, there is a way. And I hate that anyone would feel like they can't get out of something. That's a horrible and bleak way to be looking at and that's the way I looked at things for a very long time. So I hope to change anybody who feels that way, their way of thinking about that.
Yeah, and I think it's very easy to for people to sort of detach, even when they're here, like listening to an inspirational story like yours, where you did get out and you're doing things now since you're out to help others. That they have convinced themselves that there is no way, but that's their part of survival, right? To
Right.
even think about potentially escaping the nightmare or anything that's remotely close to changing anything, it it would probably mean imminent death or imminent harm to their body or their children or their lives or whatever.
Yeah.
So yeah, I just where there is a will, there is a way, but that way will be different for everybody, and it
And
will
it's not going to be easy.
very no.
That's the thing is it's not easy. And I give people credit for staying in it. I give people credit for getting out of it. It's both ways. You are going to have to pick up a sword. You can't get out of these situations without losing something, but you just need to, decide what's worth it. And you only have one life to live. And yes, there are situations where there is danger involved, and you do have to be smart,
Mhm.
and I think that that's part of my third book too. Don't go to people that know you, don't do what you think, do the opposite of what you would normally do, because that's how you break a cycle, is you change what you're doing. You don't keep doing the same thing. And I think that's very hard when you're in a cycle, to see that the only way to break it is to stop doing what you're doing. Because you just keep thinking, if I keep doing it, it'll work. And unfortunately, that's why it's not working.
Yeah, and I think I love that piece of advice because a lot of times you have sympathizers and not sympathizers with the person who's being abused, but sympathizers with the person who's doing the abusing because they can't see that version of the person or they can't muster up the imagination to think that he would ever do that. So she must, be um feeling unwell or needing some extra help or something, that they often will say or do something that could potentially put you in harm's way. I love that piece of advice. Go to a town over if you can. Find somebody
Yeah.
you don't know that they
Yeah, and
don't know.
unfortunately, I don't mean to say, I'm going to say it. You can take it for what it's worth. For a while, you need to stop trusting people.
Yeah.
You don't know what people know. You don't know what they've been talking about. And especially when the one person in the world who you are supposed to rely on has been the very person burning your bridge. you have to be very careful of who you trust and who you let into how you're feeling. And that's why, like I said, going to a third party, our organization, somebody out there that doesn't know you, doesn't have a skin in the game, is the best way to think smart, to get out of this decision and to be safe, because you don't know, unfortunately. And I don't want to make people paranoid, but smart.
Yeah, I love this. Could talk for hours, honestly. Really great. And you have a charity.
I do.
Let's talk
Yes.
about that. I want to talk about that before we close
Sure.
off this
Yeah.
wonderful conversation.
Thank you. So yes, it's called the Colin James Barth Outreach, which is my first husband's name. We are an organization that was formed. We're still in our infancy. We started in October of last year. My original thought was I want to give people mortgage assistance. But once I got really into it, I started recognizing that there are services out there. I don't want to replicate. I don't, want to take, everybody starts a charity and they just do their thing. And so, we're evolving to be a concierge service. So, if you come to us, we're building databases. We're trying to figure out who does what locally. Hopefully, we're doing it locally. We hope to do it nationally, where we put together a database of what you'd be eligible for, so that you just come to us. We say, here's a financial plan. Because most of the time, when you're in crisis, whether that it means special needs parent, caregiver, divorcee, you don't even know what you need, and you know you're so overwhelmed, and you go to the government's like, well, when you lose everything, come back. So we are under the belief that it's much more healthy for everyone involved, children, families, if you stop the spiral before poverty and step in and keep them where they're at and help them soar, rather than letting them bottom out and then saying, oh, well, now that you're poor, we'll come help. So that's our vision, that is our mission, and we are looking always to partner with corporations that are willing to uh, provide gainful employment to women who are single or head of household, so that they can work remotely, so that they're being recognized for their intelligence, for their education, even if it's 20 years old, without a work experience. God forbid. When I went into the workforce, everyone was like, well, what have you been doing for the past 10 years? Oh, I'm sorry, raising children, just this little thing called raising children. So, we're just trying to change all of these systematic ways where women find themselves in horrible circumstances. And, it takes the average woman 10 years to recover, if not more, from a divorce. And it shouldn't be that way.
I love that. When you talk about raising children, automatically what comes to mind is like project management, change management, risk management,
Psychology,
conflict resolution.
counseling,
Like there's so many job titles that could be
poison
applied.
control.
Yeah, there you go, right? Um, so I love that. And when you were telling me about that, what you're doing, um, it triggered a memory. First season, probably in the first quarter of first season, I interviewed a woman named Dr. O'Razy Cook, and she has a service specifically for women who are escaping. If they have animals, they get in touch, and she will arrange that their animal be taken to a local like foster home to be cared
Yeah,
for until they can get back on their feet. And like so I love that kind of stuff, right? And
yeah,
what I want people to know is that there are so many programs out there, people that do wonderful things, who want to do wonderful things. Um, look it up. And Julie
yeah.
Barth,
But
Colin.
yeah, when you're in crisis, the last thing you have time
Yes,
for is to figure out what you need, or to research, or so that's where we come in. We want to research. We want you to come to us, and we say, you're eligible for this. We'll take care of your dog. Call this person. You need a financial planner. Call this person. So that we're giving you a roadmap, because that's what you need, is a roadmap. You just need actionable plans, a roadmap, and how to get there.
bringing it all together, right? For one thing. And is this USA wide?
Well, right now it's out of South Carolina. Like I said, we're very, very in our infancy. It's really just me, and I have board members that are trying to help right now. We've kind of changed and altered so much over the past 6 months, because again, there's so many charities out there. I don't want to waste funds. I don't want to waste energy it's like a tree falling in the woods. If nobody hears it, it's not there. And that's how I feel about all these charity, organizations that do great work, and they have all this, they have funds to give, but they can't find people, or people can't find them. And it's just, I don't want to replicate anything. I just want to make the charity, all of it, the eligibility requirements, more mainstream, so that you're not just, my daughter is a freshman or sophomore in college. And I kind of got the idea from her because everybody, I'm sorry, I know I keep talking about, when you go for a scholarship, everybody wants the full ride, but she went in and she has 2,000 here. And, before they're paying her to go to college because she got, 2,000, 3,000. That is the way that I want our charity to work, is that we might not be able to give you the full ride, but what we can do is give you, the $1,500 for mortgage that you can get through this utility, or legal bills that you can get through this association. So we're trying to help both charities and people who are looking for them, and make that match, because that is where the magic happens, is when you can find the services and the people that need them, because that's hard to hook up.
Yeah, I love this. I love that premise, because you're right. When you are in crisis, if you have to sort of deal with, like, okay, there's this one set of stipulations for this sort of thing, you bring it all together and you help them sort of
Yeah.
streamline it as much as possible. I think
Well,
that,
there's
yeah,
always
that's
some stipulation that you don't. I had a local organization that kept saying, "Oh, we take care of legal bills. We do, we do, we do, we do." And I said, "For everyone, you would have taken care of my legal." Yeah, 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 yeah. Well, I sent 3 people to them, and one of them was like, "Oh, well, no, you're being accused of adultery," which she wasn't, but they wouldn't defend her. And I was like, "But that's what I'm saying, is you say that you're available, or you say, but you don't even know your own parameters." So that's what we're trying to break through, is the illusion that something's there, the illusion that it's not there, because it probably is. You just have to research to find it.
love this. Well, I'm sure many people appreciate the work that you're doing. And thank you for the work that you're doing for the people that it will impact, and all of those things. So what's next for you?
I'd like to make my charity a go, but I I don't know. I don't know. I just do know that the universe is, there's a reason why everyone goes through what they go through. And I believe that, if we all stopped, when you go through a really hard time, you just want to put it in your past. You don't want to think about it. You want to move away from it. You don't want to consider it anymore. But if everybody just took the time to make the road a little bit easier for the next person that comes through, the world would be such a kinder place. And it doesn't take that much to at least, provide some background, some guidance to change things that are unfair, instead of saying it's not my problem anymore, because it's all of our problems. So, that's kind of my think tank on all of it.
I love it. I thank you so much for being a guest on the show. It's been such a wonderful conversation. I'm going to go look for your books. I want to read them, and then I will review them, and also give you my thought process on both those characters independently. Right?
Please do. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. I
Just
will
sort of
enjoy that. Yeah.
break it. And continue to do the wonderful things that you're doing. For everybody at home, thank you for tuning in. And until next time, get out there and live your wildest dreams.
For media and sponsorship inquiries, email info@cksims.com or visit cksims.com and fill out the contact form. Be sure to subscribe so you don't miss an episode. A new episode airs every Saturday. CKS Media.